In 1988, a historic reparation bill was passed called the Civil Liberties Act. It gave reparations to Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II. Yet within the eligibility criteria, it stated that this was only for those who were US citizens or permanent legal residents at the time of incarceration. This effectively left out a group of victims called the Japanese Latin Americans. You see, during World War II, the US went beyond its national borders, took 2,264 Japanese Latin Americans from their homes, brought them to the US, and incarcerated them. They deemed them illegal aliens, and many were used in hostage negotiation exchanges. My thesis asks, why were the Japanese Latin Americans excluded from the Civil Liberties Act? In fact, what does reparations and redress have to do with citizenship? I interviewed over 20 Japanese American redress activists. And what I found through my study was that initially the campaign had been foundationed on the language of human rights and had included the Japanese Latin Americans in their calls for redress. Yet as the campaign progressed into the 1980s, there was a bitter trade war between the US and Japan, rising anti-Asian sentiment, and that pressured the redress leaders to change their advocacy language into civil rights and citizens' rights, to say, we were Americans and this happened to us. We are not the Japanese. This is about violations of citizens' rights. When I asked the Japanese American redress leaders, was there no space to continue with the language of human rights? They told me, human rights, you need a heart. They had deemed that 1980s white America did not have the heart to listen to the Japanese Americans unless they had framed it in the language of civil rights and citizens' rights. Human rights would have rendered the Japanese Latin Americans visible, heard, redressable. Yet without it, it was just the Japanese American redress. When we look to future reparations, like HR 40, which just passed through committee, reparations for slavery, we need to look at the language that we are using. As Jill Stauffer in Ethical Loneliness states, repair is not a neutral process. We are making choices about who gets heard and who doesn't. In conclusion, the Japanese Latin Americans have been fighting for their redress for over 76 years, and there are still many others who are still fighting. I ask, do we now have the heart to listen? Thank you.